Hello, so today we'll be going over Ornn artifacts. This is going to be my guide for set 15, talking about suggested units as well as an overview of every single Ornn artifact in the game and when you should kind of try and play around them or use them. If you like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe because I do daily TFT content. Normally I'm doing guides. These are like the once a set big guides, like the Ornn artifacts. I already did stuff like how to play 4 costs and reroll and things like that. But additionally, I'll also do updates for every patch, in addition to how to play certain comps, all kind of organized in some playlists that we're slowly building as the set goes on. Additionally, there is also my VOD channel. If you want to see daily highlights or daily TFT gaming VODs, you can check out this channel as well. It's in the description, Fenrirbut Gaming VODs. But now, let's continue. When we're thinking about artifacts, there are multiple ways to get artifacts in the game, which is why it's really important to know how to play around them. Typically, you can get them from augments, and a lot of times you're usually ripping an augment hoping that you hit something, but sometimes you can just take it as an extra powerful item if you have a comp that's flexible enough to accept those items. Additionally, you also can get them as a game start, as a portal. There's additional ways of getting them, like through prismatic drops as well. So you can also just randomly be forced into a lobby where you have to play around Ornn artifacts. So it's really important to understand how they interact with each other, how they interact with units, and basically like roughly have a game plan for your different scenarios so that when you open your artifact, you're not just like, oh no, I didn't hit the one thing that I know about. What do I do now? It kind of gives you an ability to play for top 4, as well as like, maybe fish for Exodia and play for those firsts. In this presentation, I'm going to split artifacts, kind of talking about them in generic, specific, or forcing as terms. What I mean by that is usually if I'm talking about items saying it's generic, I mean it's good on most units, so you can pretty much take it and play very flexibly around it. It's just like considered to be like similar to another item or a more powerful regular item. Specific meaning that it has to have certain conditions met. So for example, there's certain Ornn artifacts where it's like, if your unit has a shield, do this. And it's like, if your unit doesn't have a shield, it doesn't really do anything. So those ones are more specific. They have to be used on certain units in order to fully realize their potential. And then finally, there's also really forcing Ornn artifacts, ones that are bad otherwise. If you put on a unit, it will actively grief that unit a lot of the times, unless you're putting on the very few units that can actually utilize the special effects that they grant. So I'm going to kind of break it down like this to make it a little bit easier to understand as we go through it and color code it so it's nice and pretty. When we're talking about Ornn artifacts, when should you take Ornn artifacts? A lot of times you can treat them like items, so you can take it when you have a comp that requires many items. Often if you have a comp that could use multiple Ornn artifacts, that's really great. If you have AP, AD, carries, and tanks, you have less of a chance of missing when you try and open the artifact anvil. So things like Battle Academia that has win conditions, as well as some generic ones that work really nicely, and some reroll lines can also be really good here. Additionally, if you have a win condition that you're chasing, there are Ornn artifacts that can just grant you a win on the spot, or so it feels like. These are rare, so be prepared to low roll, but you could just grip and rip and see if you get it. Additionally, I want to just make it very clear for anybody who watches in the future, this is on patch 15.2c, video upload date August 19th, so the stats are going to be skewed a little bit, obviously towards 5 cost and Crystal Gambit, but also towards win conditions that exist on the current patch. Ornn artifact can change, get buffed, get adjusted, those win conditions can just not exist anymore in the future, so just keep in mind, I'm going to try and make this as future proof as possible, because I'm going to talk mostly about the item interactions with units. I'll still mention like what units are really good to make it relevant, but I'll try and make it future proof. Say stuff like, hey, it's good on these units as well. If these units get buffed, then we'll probably see this being much more popular of builds. Things like that will exist in this presentation. Just as a visual representation, some common things you might see in the stats as well. You'll see a lot of Ornn artifacts being really good on Crystal Gambit units. Sometimes they actually are good on the units, but a lot of times it's skewed towards the fact that you're usually getting artifacts as a Crystal Gambit cash out, which means you're in a really good Crystal Gambit spot. Additionally, you might see them on 5 cost being really good. Obviously, the 5 cost can use the stats really well, and they can often utilize the Ornn artifacts in a very meaningful way, but a lot of times the 5 costs are also an indicative of the games where you basically win out and you have a really good spot that you made it to a 5 cost already, so it can skew the stats a little bit, saying, hey, it's really good on these units, but in reality it's just because the units themselves are really good that you hit this late game cap. Additionally, you might also see within certain lines Ornn artifacts being good on some units. I tried to filter this out as much as possible, but I'll still mention it where it's applicable in the presentation. Sometimes if you take augments that give you multiple artifacts and then you kind of have leftover artifacts, you might see like artifacts being really good on certain units. A lot of the Battle Academia units this patch seem really good on all of them because Silvermere Dawn is basically a win condition for Jace. In previous patches like 15.1, we saw this with Gangplank lines. All of the Mentor units and all the Gangplank units had all the artifacts being broken on them because the unit itself was really broken. Here it's like a different interaction but similar idea. Anyways, we're going to go through the artifacts in alphabetical order starting now. So Blighting Jewel. Blighting Jewel gives some AP, it gives some mana gen. The way that it works is that if you deal magic damage, you reduce the target's magic resist by 4. And if their magic resist is 0, then you grant yourself 5 mana instead. This is usually a little bit more specific or forcing because you want to put it with a unit that has good damage over time effects or dot damage. If you're doing do X amount of damage in X amount of time, that's going to count as multiple ticks within that second or couple second period, which will in turn proc the effect of Blighting Jewel a lot faster, reducing that magic resist, allow you to do more damage, and then also allowing you to cast more repeatedly because you're going to generate the mana from the hits. Karma and Malzahar are the resident dot damage users, so these are going to be your main users of the Blighting Jewel. Additionally, because it's technically like every instance of magic damage, multi-hit units can also be pretty good on it. Zyra scales well with attack speed, Twisted Fate also scales well with attack speed and hit multiple units a lot of the times, and Yuumi also does like the burst of multiple pages, which can do a lot of the Blighting Jewel procs as well. Obviously the 5 cost and the Crystal Gambit, a little bit of a skew towards those. I wouldn't necessarily see Blighting Jewel and say it's a Zyra game. I would more refer to the main users for that. Next we have Dawncore. So Dawncore gives some AD, gives some AP. It reduces the max mana by 10, and then subsequent casts reduce mana by 10% to a minimum of 15. This one's a little bit specific and forcing. This kind of behaves similar to like blue buff in previous sets, where if you have a very low mana threshold, it's really good. So if you don't have a lot of mana, then reducing your max mana by 10 is going to be really impactful. So it's really good on units that have low mana, but also want to chain multiple casts together really fast. Units like Katarina and Akali are really good. Katarina loves to just keep spinning, so she's one of the best holders of Dawncore. It's giga broken on her right now. And then Akali loves to chain cast to get all those multiple marks off, so if you can reduce her mana to such an abysmally low amount, and she already starts with a very low mana threshold, she can basically just get those chain casts off very fast and just like apply damage to everyone really easily. Other units like Kog'Maw, he basically just gets a lot of casts off repeatedly and has a low mana threshold, but reducing the mana allows him to build attack speed. So in Kog'Maw reroll lines, not super relevant on the current patch, but if it becomes more relevant, really good on him. Syndra, maybe a little bit of a Crystal Gambit skew, but I think it's also good with Rising Chaos Syndra. And then obviously Braum, as a high cap unit, if you're just trying to find a unit to put it on, Braum loves to cast repeatedly because obviously his cast is so impactful. It basically can skew or win the game instantly. So getting Dawncore on him could actually get him into situations where he's getting repeated casts off in a really like ridiculous way. Next we have Death's Defiance. So with Death's Defiance, it gives a lot of stats, just like some armor, some attack speed, some AD, but it's mostly like an Omnivamp survivability type of item. Basically, 50% of the damage that the holder would receive is dealt as non-lethal damage over 4 seconds. So a lot of times, it's pretty generic, and you're usually putting it on melee units for survivability. I will say, this item is a lot weaker this set, because a lot of units have the Omnivamp survivability already, so the item feels a little bit less impactful. They changed roles so that a lot of the attack fighters and assassins or magic assassins, like assassins and fighters, frontline units that do damage, have built-in Omnivamp now. So Death's Defiance feels a little bit weaker because a lot of times you'd rather build towards damage, like a Hodge if you're going on the Omnivamp route, because Hand of Justice with crit can build into a crit build that works a little bit better. However, it is okay on stuff like Garen, for example, because the hero augment. Jace could also work pretty nicely, and Vi can also work really nicely with it, with their hero augment. Additionally, like obviously on 5 cost, it's going to be really strong because they can make great use of this survivability. Units like Lee Sin would be great. Darius reroll isn't that strong right now, but if he got buffed a little bit, or if the Darius reroll line became a little bit more prevalent, Death's Defiance is great on Darius because he has like a huge amount of HP and AD already, and like ability to do damage, so it's really nice to have that survivability on him. It can also work good on some tanks. Here I said Leona. Leona is more so like this hewing because of Battle Academia, but I just wanted to like have a representation here to say like sometimes if you're in need of like a tank item, this can kind of help your tanks live a little bit. That's not a recommendation at all. I would like for most games, this is only like a worst case scenario, but it's just something to keep in mind because it does give a little bit of armor, and the non-lethal damage does allow the unit to survive quite a bit. So if you have like a drain tank like a Leona that she lives forever, this can sometimes help out a little bit. But of course, not the first pick. Definitely not the first pick, but just something I wanted to say to keep in mind just in case. Next, we have Death's Defiance. Death's Defiance, it gives AP and a little bit of mana regen. Actually gives 2 mana regen, which makes it a lot better, specifically for this set. That's actually pretty massive, just to keep in mind. It also has the bonus effect that you blast their current target for 40% of their max health. And then additionally, this gets repeated every 13 seconds. This item is pretty generic because it gives AP and mana gen, so you can often put it on most AP backline units or AP units in general. I wouldn't say it's a first pick because it doesn't feel like it does that much in terms of the stats. It does help a lot with casting, so you can often, you know, if you're building like a no mana build, for example, like no mana gen, it can work really well. But the 2 mana gen is like one of the big reasons why it's a little bit better of an item this time around. Basically, I just put a lot of the AP units here: Karma, Yumi, Gwen, Zyra, Seraphine, if we're looking at the 5-cost high caps. Could also work well on Ziggs. The crew line typically likes to have artifacts. There's a lot of good ones on multiple units. Deathfire Grasp can also work really well on the Ziggs. The mana gen and the AP are good stats for him because he has a lot of damage amp already. Next, we have Fishbones. So Fishbones gives some AD and some attack speed. It has these extra effects of doubling the holder's attack range, and then it also causes all their attacks to target random enemies. The targeting random enemies is massive. This item is a little bit specific because obviously some units you really want to burst down with your unit, and then other units, like, you know, you might want to have some backline access. It's good with high AD units because if you have an insane AD, and it also pairs really well with crit for this reason, the random switching could be insane. The random switching could also basically snipe the backline very easily, especially if you have like a 4 hex range unit. You're basically firing, or a sniper, you're just firing off your attacks, and then randomly with crit and AD builds, you can just absolutely just decimate a backline carry. Additionally, in the past, it's also been really good on melee carries when you want to turn a melee carry into a ranged carry. There's not crazy abusers of this tech this set in general, as there were in some of the previous sets, but it is something to keep in mind because you can just make a melee unit a little bit more safe by making them have double the range, so now they don't have to be in the front line and absorb a bunch of damage. The main users, I would say, are Kai'Sa and Jhin. Kai'Sa and Jhin have insane amounts of AD. Kai'Sa can scale her AD like pretty much infinitely, and Jhin as well, as a fight goes on. So Fishbones works really well with these builds to just be able to snipe and kill around the front line, so you're not getting caught trying to kill the front line. You can scam fights very easily. Another unit that scales infinitely or really nicely is Smolder, so really good on him as well. Ashe, also typically you're pairing Fishbones, and then Ashe, you have like your Gwynsu Kraken build where she's going to be ramping up her attack speed and ramping up her AD with Krakens. So Fishbones actually works pretty well on her to do a bunch of damage to backline carries, so keep that in mind. Here it also says, like in the stats a little bit, that it's good on Kayle, but Kayle obviously is a little bit of a weaker comp right now, so it's a little bit hard to say. But when you get to level 9, like Ascended Kayle, and she's like firing her waves, having the waves randomly target enemies is actually pretty powerful because she can snipe pretty easily and do a lot of like spread damage. But I would strictly, to make better use of the stats, aim more towards the melee the AD carries rather than Kayle, who's more of an AP carry. Additionally, if we're going for range extending, Volibear and Lee Sin can work really well, and the random targeting for Volibear can make sure that he doesn't get caught on a tank. Additionally, we have Lee Sin and Twisted Fate, Sivir and Gangplank. Sivir, I think, is pretty good on. Gangplank, it's pretty good on him in particular, but right now, after a lot of the nerfs, Gangplank is pretty bad as a unit, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that line. But if you have an insane Gangplank spawn and you want to go for it, I think it also helps him out quite a bit because it keeps him a lot safer and allows you to build more towards damage, and you don't really have to go for survivability. Next, we have Flickerblades. Flickerblades is very, very good. It has been good since the inception. And I might make like a separate like video just bitching about the item, to be honest, but let's just talk about it. It gives you some starting AP and some attack speed. Basically, attacks grant 7% stacking attack speed, and every 5 attacks you also grant 4 attack damage and ability power. It's an item that scales really well with units that love to auto attack. It's pretty generic because it's so good that it's pretty much good on almost anybody who likes to auto attack. So I would say it's pretty generic. I think if you see Flickerblades, you should always highly consider taking it and playing a line that plays towards it, because it's just a really good item. The way that it works is similar to the old Gwynsu, where if you have a unit that auto attacks or has a high base attack speed, you'll basically just constantly ramp up attack speed with subsequent auto attacks. This was a really strong and really like hard to balance interaction when it was a normal item. So now it being an artifact that also gives you ramping attack damage and ability power, it has been like insanely valuable and insanely good. Now obviously this is 15.2, they might nerf it eventually, but you know, for the most part it has been nerfed for like several months, so it's still really good. Main users obviously are going to be Ashe. Ashe I think is the main one that comes to mind, because she is like insane scaling with auto attacks. So this is going to be like a better Gwynsu basically, because the new Gwynsu kind of ramps up over time. This was going to ramp up with her auto attack. She's actually going to get a lot more value off of it, and she's also going to ramp up AD and AP while she does so. Twisted Fate as well, really good. He actually makes use of both the attack damage and the ability power ramping up, because he has multi-faceted attacks, so he works good with it. I put a little divider here, but Kale is also really good with it. Kog'Maw is also good with it. Garen Hero Augment, you usually want to build attack speed on him. It's broken on him. Shen is Hero Augment. I didn't put the little sticker, but just know that it's Shen Hero Augment. You usually build him with attack speed in the back line. Ziggs loves attack speed. Kennen is also Hero Augment. Sorry, I copy pasted, but they all copy pasted in the same spot. So it's Garen, Shen, and Kennen are the Hero Augments, just to make it very explicit and clear. Viego as well, really good with auto attacking because he's a duelist, and Gangplank as well, auto attacking because he's a duelist. Just great on all of them, honestly. So just keep it in mind, but usually if you're picking, you'll aim more towards like the Ashe, Twisted Fate, like whoever holds a Gwynsu. If you're building a Gwynsu on the unit, Flickerblades would be a better Gwynsu always. So basically any unit that uses a Gwynsu, Flickerblades instead. Next we have Gambler's Blade. So Gambler's Blade, I would say, is pretty generic. Basically the way it works, it gives you some attack speed, some AP, and then you get 1% bonus attack speed per gold in your bank, up to 30 gold. So at its most, it will give you 65 attack speed and 10 AP. This is primarily an econ augment, or an econ item. It's good on high attack speed units, like if you have a Gwynsu, because it can generate you a lot of econ. But I would say it's a weak item. Obviously, it gives you a lot of attack speed, but a Gwynsu is always going to be better than a Gambler's Blade. And if you have a Gwynsu, usually you don't want to make 2 Gwynsus on a lot of units, because like it's rare that like the way that they change Gwynsu now to work, you don't really need 2 on a lot of the units. You usually only need 1. So you don't want to substitute a damage item with a Gambler's Blade when your Gwynsu is usually your attack speed item. That's just kind of how things worked out right now. So you know, you can still leave it on the unit, but what I'm saying is a lot of times you want to move it late game. Typically, you're going to want to take the Gambler's Blade, and you're going to want to, you know, just use it for early econ to make sure that you hit your board. Some main users a lot of times, however, are going to be Ziggs. I put some of the 5 costs because, you know, obviously you can put on a 5 cost. It still gives a lot of attack speed. So if you have a 5 cost that likes attack speed, this is a good way to just give them a cheap item without having to like convert your carry items on them. So for example, if you're just throwing in a random Yone, throwing in a random Zyra, throwing in a random Twisted Fate, these are units that you can just like shove the Gambler's Blade on late game and have some value off of it. But it's not something that's like, you know, it's not like I'm saying you have a Gambler's Blade, it's a Yone game. What I'm saying is these are holders of it when you get a better item on your unit. Additionally, I put Kale on here. Gambler's Blade is really great if you're trying to play around Kale, because she can generate a lot of econ early in the game, but obviously when you get to like your fully ascended Kale and you're all good and you're trying to win the game, you want to move it and put a damage item on her instead. It's going to be better, trust me. Additionally, one thing I wanted to note here, we're just going to do a small aside with power-ups. So I'm just gonna Shadow Clone, by the way, this is like an interaction. When you make a copy of a unit, it copies their items. So with a lot of these econ items, it's not something that's super relevant because a lot of times it's like you're gonna want to move it off your carry anyways. But Gambler's Blade could actually, you can generate multiple gold. So if you have like Shadow Clone Kale, for example, with a Gambler's Blade, you can generate twice as much gold because the Shadow Clone is going to proc the Gambler's Blade effect as well. So if you're trying to generate like Giga Econ, just keep in mind the Econ ones are pretty good with Shadow Clone in general. Next, we have Gold Collector. So attacks and abilities execute enemies below 12% of their maximum health, and then executions have a 33% chance to drop 1 gold. It gives you some AD and some crit, so this is pretty generic. It's usually considered to be mostly an econ item. However, the execute that it has, as well as the crit chance and AD, makes it a semi-decent item on a lot of units, so it's not as bad as Gambler's Blade where you want to move it later. And it could be really good with units that have backline access, because obviously an execute gives you a good chance of just killing everything off. Caitlyn, for example, extremely good. Jhin, extremely good because he just has like really good one-shot potential. Kaisa is not as good on. I thought it would be, but I think it's just because you want different items on her to make better use of it. And I think she also gets an execute because of Supreme Cell, so it's just like she doesn't make as good use of the Gold Collector. But either way, Caitlyn, obviously she can snipe the backline, really good on her. Jhin, huge amounts of AD, and with Artistic KO, it's great to just get the execute to proc effects. Volibear as well, to get those resets, it actually is pretty decent on him. It's not like an insanely good item, but he's a good holder of it, because if you can get those executes and those kills, you can reset and get those slams. Additionally, Samira, Senna, Vi Hero Augment, then your late game caps like Lee Sin, Twisted Fate, even Varus, if you have a 5 cost that are hitting or accessing backline or hitting multiple units, you can sometimes proc that Gold Collector effect and get some easy kills without actually killing them and just getting the execute proc. Next, we have Horizon Focus. So this one's pretty specific because it gives you a lot of tank stats, obviously. It gives you some mana gen as well, which is really nice. 2 mana gen, pretty good. So the item in general is a lot better this set. But basically the way that works is if you stun an enemy, you deal 30% of their max health as magic damage. So obviously specific because you need to play a unit that stuns. That's pretty much a no-brainer. However, it's generic with fruit because there is a fruit called Unstoppable that's in the game. And with Unstoppable, when you're targeting new targets, you stun them by just running through them. So the Unstoppable stun will actually proc the Horizon Focus effect, which means that pretty much any tank could use Horizon Focus pretty well, which is why I say it's generic with fruit. If you're trying to play around a tank and you want to play around Unstoppable, you can dig for Unstoppable, pair it up with Horizon Focus, and then do that. If you're thinking about the units that do stun, the ones that obviously are going to be really good are Rammus and Jarvan. Those are your resident stun bots, especially Rammus, because he has like really good stunning like multiple times. But Jarvan, you can just do a big stun, get a big proc of magic damage with the Horizon Focus. Kabuko and Braum also stun, but I would say they're a little bit less than the Rammus Jarvan. Kabuko's pretty good, but Kabuko lines are a little bit less common now, so that's why he's not looking too hot. But then additionally, if you have like units like Malphite and Rakan that don't necessarily have like a crazy stun, I think Malphite has like a little bit sometimes, but like if you have like giga tanks that you put with Unstoppable, that they're just unkillable and they're just dashing around repeatedly because like they just live forever, it can work really well. So like Rakan and Katarina reroll, Malphite and Crew reroll, or any other reroll line, you can just pair it with Unstoppable and you'll do really well. Next we have Hullcrusher. So Hullcrusher gives some armor and MR. It has this bonus effect that if you're not adjacent to anyone, you gain 600 health, 20 attack damage, and 20 ability power. So it basically gives a lot of well-rounded stats. Here, I accidentally cut it off. This item is very generic. It would be green for generic. It's a really good frontline item. It gives a lot of stats, but you need to isolate your frontline. It's also strong with some melee units. Units that really love the stats are actually Star Guardian units. Star Guardian isn't that popular, but Poppy and Nico have really great synergies with Hullcrusher because usually they're very isolated in the front line, and then with all the other Star Guardian bonuses, getting a bunch of stats on them is actually pretty impactful and pretty powerful. It's also pretty good on Shen and Garen. A lot of times, like, those are like the reroll lines. Garen, I don't think it's hero Garen, but it's usually like, you know, maybe a little bit of Battle Academia skewing. But Garen also scales really well with HP because he gains a lot of HP as well. So getting a bunch of stats on him can make him pretty impactful with those Battle Academia boards. But of course, you can put him on any tank. Hullcrusher is one of the more generic ones. It just gives you like good tank stats. So Set, Leona, Cassante, I just put all the 4-cost tanks here as well. Could also be really good on them. Not like really good. Like obviously this one's gonna be like not like a game-winning artifact, but it's gonna be like, you know, okay, so you can play around it. Next we have Infinity Force. So Infinity Force just gives you basically every stat, but a little bit of it. So it gives AD, AP, attack speed, armor, MR, and HP. It's really generic. It gives a little bit of all stats, so it's very versatile. It's not particularly strong unless the unit can use all the stats. So typically this was an item that was really good on melee units, right? If you can think of most melee units, they usually have an AP and an AD scaling. Think like Volibear and stuff like that. But currently this set, it's not that great. In the past, it was a lot better because it gave starting mana. They didn't really give it anything. Like, I don't even think it gives you mana gen. So it just kind of feels really bad because the starting mana was so important on a lot of the melee carries. They just want to get the first cast off and just like start doing damage. So now it's like kind of like a little bit eh. So I would definitely not consider this to be like my first pick of an Ornn artifact pretty much ever. But, you know, obviously units that use multiple stats really well, like Darius, melee kind of unit would be great. Yone, great use of multiple stats as well. But then you can also put on different 5 costs, even backline units sometimes. Braum, Twisted Fate, Gwen. Even if it's not like the best item, if you have to just pick something, it does give like all well-rounded stats. The survivability aspect is a little bit wasted on backline, but if you have a unit like Gwen, for example, that sometimes can get hit, or even if you have like, you know, you're playing against boards that have backline access, like we all know the Akali's and the Volleys running around everywhere, it can give you a little bit of survivability, which is nice. A lot of it is just making sure you have good use of the multiple stats. So units that scale off multiple stats well are going to be better users of the item. Next, we have Innervating Locket. So Innervating Locket gives you some HP and some mana gen, and then the user gains 2% of their total mana whenever they're hit by an attack. So the idea is that it helps to generate mana very effectively if you're getting hit a lot, or if you like, you know, if you're like working with like a really giga tank. It used to also like recover HP. I think that that's cut off here. I believe it still does recover the max HP. It's really good with solo tanks and high HP units in general for that reason, because it also has a percent HP effect that just didn't really show up here. Or if they removed it, then disregard. But typically it's good on like the high HP units because you want to like just get the chain cast off and then heal up. But either way, if you have strong casts as well, it could be really good. And often it's good with reroll that allows you to have really high HP. So here I have Garen on this board. It's not Garen Hero Augment, by the way. Innervating Locket is broken on regular Garen because when he casts, he gains max HP because of a Battle Academia. So sometimes if you have like a Garen 3, if you've ever seen like a Garen 3 with Innervating Locket, the unit is absolutely fucking unkillable because by the end of the game, this guy scales to have infinite HP. It's actually absurd. But other units that are hard to kill, like Leona, could be great. Malphite, also really great. Even a Dr. Mundo, because obviously every subsequent cast, the Mundo gains more and more HP. Really great there as well. Braum and Jace, obviously, if they have casts that could help them from getting hit with effects, it can work out really well. Jace does a lot of damage, and obviously Braum, his cast is really impactful because he just grabs a unit and swings them around for a couple seconds. So Innervating Locket can help out with those because it helps to generate a lot of mana for those units. Next, we have Lich Bane. So Lich Bane gives you some AP and some attack speed. The first attack after each ability cast deals X bonus magic damage. So this is pretty specific because you really want to put on a unit that just has like multiple casts very repeatedly. However, the X bonus damage is basically a certain amount of damage that scales with the stages. So it's usually underpowered. Unless you have an insane amount of casts, because you need to be casting so many times in order to keep proccing the Lich Bane effect. The main user is typically Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw isn't like, you know, he's not like necessarily considered to be a casting unit, but he does auto attack infinitely basically, and that causes him to cast repeatedly. So he's usually the best procker of the Lich Bane effect. Additionally, Prodigy units can work really well, like Malzahar Yuumi, but I think that it's not a strong enough item on these units to warrant it being put on them. Because if you think about the cast that Malzahar and Yuumi have, even though they cast repeatedly, they don't cast enough times to make the Lich Bane damage better than just a normal damage item on them, most of the time at least. But also if you're looking for 5 cost, Zyra and Gwen could also work well on this. Like, you know, if they get their casts off, Zyra scales well with attack speed, so she can proc Lich Bane a couple times as well. But in general, it's pretty much a Kog'Maw item. That's why I try to make a little bit more of a visual distinction between the Kog'Maw and the rest of the party this time around. So just keep that in mind. The rest of the units is pretty mid on. Next we have Lightshield Crest. So Lightshield Crest, it gives you armor and MR, and then every 3 seconds you shield the lowest percent ally for 70% of their combined armor and magic resist for 5 seconds. Additionally, when you die, there's a bonus effect here that's just not listed. When you die, the Lightshield Crest also procs the extra shielding on all of the remaining allies. So it's really good for survivability. It's very generic. The reason it's generic is because it scales with armor. So most tanks, if you build armor, it will work well on. Now, I also indicated here, I put Gargoyle just to indicate like armor MR, but obviously you can build like any armor MR items and you can scale the Lightshield Crest pretty effectively. Additionally, if the units get armor through other means like Bastion, that's going to work really well with Lightshield Crest additionally. So a lot of times it's paired really well with these types of items like Gargoyles, where you can get a lot of armor MR, or Bastions, where you're giving armor and MR to your whole team and yourself included. Units like Vi, for example, work well with Lightshield Crest. Obviously, like, you know, if you're playing Vi on your board, it's a little bit weird, but Vi has a passive effect where she gets extra resists for every component that's slammed. So she can actually, even though she's not a Bastion, she can scale up her armor and MR pretty effectively by just like slamming a bunch of items. So this isn't Vi hero augment, by the way. That scales her AD. This is normal Vi. That's why there's no hero. Shen, additionally, you know, obviously 3-star Shen. If you're playing crew, he's also a Bastion, so you get the extra effects there. Rammus scales armor and MR every time he levels up with Monster Trainer. And then Leona, obviously Bastion, but of course, like I said, pairing it with our armor and MR items, it can work well on any tank. Next we have Ludens Tempest. So Ludens Tempest, 100% of the overkill damage plus 100 is dealt as magic damage to 3 enemies, and it gives you a bunch of AD and AP. This one's a little bit specific because you want to play on high damage and burst units. It often won't really proc unless you're overkilling, so you want to overkill and do a lot of damage. So think about your units that one-shot. The main holders are going to be units like Ahri, Jhin, Smolder, Caitlyn. So Ahri, obviously, she also has a little bit of an overkill effect. It's really good on her if you can play like Ahri 3 with like Star Guardian. She can do a lot of damage. Jhin as well has like that whole one-shot potential with Artistic KO. Smolder scales his AD, so at one point you can actually get Ludens Tempest to be really strong. And Caitlyn, obviously, if she's sniping the backline, getting the overkill and the extra little effect that she has, where she has the bouncing ball that does extra damage. With the Ludens, she can basically clear out a lot of backline very fast. And then I also put Seraphine here. If you ever make it to a point where Seraphine's doing like a nuke and she's dropping that giga ball of doom, then Ludens Tempest can be really good. Here I put Beware Sight for cash out. That's a mistake. Don't worry. That's from last set. I just missed it because my avatar was in the way. I think it's still kind of in the way here. So when I was reviewing it and practicing my speech, I just didn't see it. But I saw it now, so my bad. Anyways. Next item. Manazane. So Manazane, basically after casting first time in combat, you gain 120 mana over 5 seconds. The way this works is that it gives you a lot of like regular stats, but it also gives you 1 mana regen, which makes it pretty nice this set especially. It's really generic. It's good on most units that want to cast, because often you can get 1 cast, and with the 120 mana, you can often get multiple casts off very fast, very early in a fight. You can often replace other mana items with it, especially this set, because it gives a little bit of mana regen. So any unit that wants to have a mana item on them, Manazane could work really well. It's also going to use its scale really well with early casts. So, you know, think about like, you know, units that like want to scale with those casts early, like Yuumi, even like Akali, which we'll talk about when we go through the units on the column on the right hand side. Additionally, it now gives some mana regen, as I mentioned. So it also, in the past, like Manazane was a little bit awkward because sometimes you would still need mana regen after the Manazane, because you just do like all your damage, and then later in the fight you wouldn't be able to cast again because you'd be in like this like purgatory of like not having a mana item. So now it gives mana gen, so it actually is a little bit better in my opinion. Units that love to cast, Jarvan and Braum, I put them at the top because it actually performs really well on these units because it can sway the fight very easily. With Jarvan, you can get 2 stuns instantly. Braum, you can get 2 throws easily. But typically, you're going to be looking more towards like your AP, like as a replacement of mana gen item for those units, like Karma and Yuumi. Yuumi, typically, you don't build mana gen on, but Yuumi scales off multiple casts at the beginning of a fight so that she gets multiple pages. So if you put Manazane on her, it's actually extremely strong because your Yuumi just starts hitting like a truck within the first couple seconds of the fight. Additionally, units like Kai'Sa, Akali can scale really well with it. Gwen could get to her 3rd cast pretty effectively with Manazane. Smolder as well just pumps out insane amounts of damage. Caitlyn, and then I put Syndra, Rising Chaos. She works really well with some of the mana gen. and Varus as well. Like lots of units that love to cast repeatedly can do really well with these types of items. Next we have Mittens. So Mittens gives some attack speed and some durability. Basically unit shrinks, it becomes really cute, and then you get increased movement speed and immunity to chill. This one's pretty generic because it just gives a bunch of attack speed and durability, so you can put on pretty much anybody, but it's a little bit more specific because it's not that impactful, the attack speed and the durability, unless it's like specifically certain melee style carries. Because it gives a lot of attack speed, obviously it can be like used on multiple units, but generically, like, you know, it's better on melee units in general, right? You want to have a unit that can make use of the increased movement speed as well. A lot of melee units love to quickly jump to another unit, and basically like run around as much as possible. A lot of times, like I'm sure you've seen it, like you have a melee unit and they're taking their lolly diddly time looking for their wallet, walking from one side of the board to the other. You really want to have something like Mittens because then they can like snap to another unit and continue doing damage. Units like Garen and Vi, their hero augments, it's really good because they usually like to have attack speed with those and they can pump out damage. Braum is really great because like a lot of times with Braum, he's like walking really slowly after he does his cast and he throws a unit away. Having Mittens makes it so that he immediately jumps right back onto a new unit, and he could often get cast off a little bit faster, which is really important. Other units like Jace obviously can help out. Lee Sin, Twisted Fate, Yone. I put some units like Twisted Fate, Yone. They're obviously a high cap and it's skewed because they're 5 cost. I don't think it's particularly amazing on them, but they are units that can use attack speed really well. And movement speed on Lee Sin and Yone is also great because they can jump and stick to other units to do a bunch of damage. Next we have Moguls Mail. So this is another econ generation item. Basically when you're getting hit, you get 1 armor, magic resist, and 10 health, stacking up to 35 times, leading to 35 armor, 35 magic resist, and an additional 350 health. So it's actually pretty generic. It's usually an econ item, but some users can use it a little bit better than others because if you can make use of all the stats, it's a lot more meaningful. Typically it's good on solo front lines because if you put a solo front line, you can stack up a lot faster. The sooner that you stack up, the sooner you start generating econ, because you only generate the gold once you're at max stacks, and then after you're at max stacks, every couple seconds you're going to generate a little bit more gold. So often it can help a lot with reroll lines because you're going to make like a giga front line that's usually going to be like your main tank, and then you can have the Moguls Mail just generate econ to allow you to cap your board really high. Units like Malphite can work really well. Garen in certain cases, if you're playing like, you know, some niche lines, or Garen like worth the wait, it can work really well on him. Cassante, Shen, Aatrox, it can work on any tank for for econ generation, but typically it's going to be on those units that you're playing with a reroll line. Malphite Shen with crew, Aatrox with Kale, for example, where you can just get like infinite econ and help yourself to scale really effectively. Next we have Prowlers Claw. So Prowlers Claw gives some crit chance, which is like a good chunk, like 50 crit chance, but it also gives some AD and some HP. And the way that it works is after you kill a target, you shed the negative effects, and then you dash to the furthest target within 4 hexes, and the next 2 critical attacks deal 60% bonus critical damage, or bonus whatever damage, right? It's pretty specific because obviously you're going to be dashing around, so it has to be used on melee units, and of the melee units, it has to be ones that like to dash around and not just like drain tank. It gives AD crit and high movability, which is great, and the ability to dash to furthest enemies could often mean that you get to access the backline, which can give you really good wraps and easy backline access. The synergy that it gives with crit as well works amazingly with a lot of units. So for example, Vi, a lot of times when you're using the hero augment, you're building her with like the IE Hodge crit build. Prowlers Claw now just gives her access to the backline. She can one-shot a backline unit. Darius as well. A lot of times you're going for like giga insane damage and resets. Now you can just do that to the backline. Volibear as well. Volibear, it's insanely crazy because he just jumps to the backline now. You know, the biggest problem with Volibear sometimes is that he's stuck on some frontline unit and can't kill them. Well, not with Prowler's Claw. Now you can just snipe the backline. Additionally, units like Lee Sin, it can work well on. Juggernaut Lee Sin, you can just do an insane amount of damage. But also Braum. Braum, if you get like a reset and he just dashes to a backline unit, you can sometimes cheese with Braum. Braum's a really good holder of a lot of artifacts because obviously he's really good and you can just shove random items on him. But sometimes you can get a lot of cheese scenarios, like especially with Prowlers Claw. We'll talk about some other situations after as well. Next we have Rapid Fire Cannon. So this one gives 66 attack speed. Additionally, it gives 1 attack range increased by 1 every time you kill an enemy. this used to be like kind of a generic item because it just gave a lot of attack speed and increased your range, but it's starting to be a little bit more specific. I can't really decide which. The item itself is pretty bad right now, just because like the starting attack speed isn't as good, and it's not a good replacement for like a Gwynsu on a lot of the attack speed units. So it's kind of like eh. And there's not a good holder of like the extra range. It used to be broken on Gangplank, but now it's like, you know, Gangplank's a lot worse, so it's not that great. Obviously, it's good with AoE or melee units that want to turn into backline units, so it was great with Gangplank in the past, but now Gangplank, you know, his ult or his execute killing thing doesn't scale with the range, so it's not as good. But it's generally mid because of attack speed changes in general. So this wouldn't be my first choice, even though it's really generic, but it's something that you could fall back on of just a unit that likes attack speed. It's like, you know, it's serviceable sometimes. Vi Hero Augment is pretty good if you're giving her range. The Vi Hero Augment, obviously, it's really strong right now. It does a lot of damage, so a lot of the artifacts seem to be good on that in particular. But there's also Crystal Gambit skewing, by the way. So a lot of times when you're playing Vi Hero Augment, you also get the Crystal Gambit cash outs, which can give you Ornn artifacts, which also makes it really strong. But I already mentioned it before, but we'll still talk about it because I think it's actually okay on her. Gangplank, as I said before, but Gangplank now he's a little bit weaker, so even though it's good on him, the line is a little bit weak, so be careful. Viego does really well with extra attack range. I think Rapid Fire Cannon is like insane Viego tech. I've seen it do really well in some games in the past. However, I think that the Viego reroll line has to be a little bit stronger for this to be like a giga combo, but it's just something to keep your eyes on. Like Viego with range, he's one of those like melee units that would love to be like a backline unit because he has no built-in like Omnivamp besides like his trait, like his fighter trait or whatever. And the extra range can make it so he just does like insane damage because he has like empowering his ult has like 3 stages where it does like empowering damage dealing, which works usually really well with the extra range. Either way, you know, you can rock it if you can try it if you want, but I wouldn't try it this current patch. Gwen also works pretty well with range because it just makes her a little bit safer, so she can like be further back and not get like easily killed. Yone and Volibear also can work okay, but I don't think it's better than just having other builds on them, so just be careful. And then I also put Ashe here. I don't think it's good on Ashe. It's like barely okay on Ashe, right, in terms of stats. Ashe, you just generally want other items, and the double attack speed doesn't really scale her as well because of the way the new Gwynsu works. So you don't need the starting attack speed as much. But I'm just saying, like, if you have a unit that loves to have attack speed, this gives a large amount of attack speed, so it's like okay, it's like a last resort. It's like I can maybe make do with this and play for like a top 4 or something. So I put Ashe on here as well just to give you that reminder. Next we have Seeker's Armguard. So Seeker's Armguard, takedowns increase the holder's armor, magic resist, and ability power by 15, increase to 20 if they score the kill, and then it gives you some armor, MR, and some AP. So when you're thinking about this item, it's a little bit specific. It scales you with armor, MR, and AP, so it can work on units that either want to scale as tanks, but also might want to scale for AP. Ideally, you want to use it with a reroll unit that is either doing AoE or getting a lot of kills, because then you get more effects with the Seeker's Armguard. But you want to participate in the takedown, so it needs to be one or the other. But a lot of times, it can also work on a backline unit. We see that really often when you want a backline unit to just survive and also get like all the scaling with the AP and the armor and MR. A unit like Kale can work really well on for that reason, because as long as the Kale's alive, she can probably like kill everything. And then scaling the AP is really good because she scales her auto attacks, fire waves when you get her to max level. So it works like kind of like an Archangel's that gives her some survivability. So it's okay. But a lot of times you'll see it on tanks like Malphite, right? Where they're basically absorbing the damage, so they're participating in all the takedowns, like in the front line. And then they can scale their armor MR really effectively and AP, so Malphite can actually do an insane amount of damage. There's also Malphite Hero, which I think it can also work good on, but I think it also works on regular Malphite, which is why I didn't put the Hero. Katarina and Viego, these are going to be like your main ideas as well, because obviously Katarina and Viego, they kind of hit in some cases AoE, but they also scale really well of having the armor and MR because they want to survive, and having the scaling AP because they're obviously AP damage dealers in the front line. Other units could be like Akali and Rakan. I think it's like kind of okay on Akali. I'd be careful, but it's kind of like almost like an Archangel substitute that gives her some survivability, but usually she's fine with that, and you're better off just scaling her AP more aggressively with a different item. Or Rakan, if you're playing like reroll lines, he can just like infinitely gain the armor and MR, and then the AP allows him to heal more effectively. Just FYIs. Next, we have Silvermere Dawn. So this one is the Giga item. This one's the one that's like, you know, this is the win condition one. Basically, you get 110 AD, then you get 50 armor and 50 magic resist. Silvermere Dawn, it grants immunity to stuns, and the holder's attack stun the target for 0.8 seconds. And then they added this other little fun part that's really fucked up and weird, but convert 1% of damage taken as mana. This item is insane. It is crazy. And it's absolutely nuts. And there's certain sets where it just becomes absolutely like the most broken thing ever. The main thing that you want to know is that it gives insane AD. It locks your attack speed, so it's very specific. But you know, it can sometimes work on different units, but it's usually pretty forcing. Because your attack speed is locked, so a lot of backline units can't really make good use of it. However, it does give a lot of armor and MR and the stun immunity, so a lot of melee or frontline units, even some tanks, can make great use of it because it does give some tank stats and the immunity to stun. However, it can be Exodia, and now it gives mana on taking damage. So the unit that it's really broken on is Jace. If you see Silvermere Dawn, like, I would say 9 out of 10 times you should just be playing Jace. It's very rare that I would not be playing Jace if I saw the Silvermere Dawn. This Jace unit, like, the stats for Jace 3 with Silvermere Dawn are better than, like, a lot of 3-star 4 cost. Like, that's how broken it is. Like, if somebody has Silvermere Dawn Jace, you pretty much are, like, assuming they hit. If they miss, then obviously you have a chance of, like, playing for, like, first. But if they hit and they have, like, Jace 3-star, you are probably never going to go first. Like, there's very little that can beat it. Like, it is absurd how strong it is. And I'll explain why, right? Jace scales really well off AD, obviously. Scales really well off of the armor and MR. So it's like already like a broken Exodia thing. You can't stun him, so now that's a thing that happens. But the big part of it is that in the past, Silvermere Dawn, like, it was always broken on certain units that have really good AD scaling, can do an insane amount of damage. Jace especially, he scales with potential that he just does, like, spread damage. So when he gets his cast off, he literally just, like, could delete multiple units at once, which is what makes it so broken in the first place. But the problem is that in the past, like they said, as devs, they were like, hey, you know, we don't want to make those 1v9 scenarios where units, melee units in particular, that do insane AD scaling, get chain cast from getting hit. So what they did, they changed it so that only tanks generate mana from being hit. So Jace, without Silvermere Dawn, is still a playable comp, but it's a lot worse because he doesn't generate mana from being hit. So in order to generate mana, he has to auto attack, and he has to do like other means of mana gen, or he has to commit an item to mana generation. Silvermere Dawn generates mana for him. So they basically locked that interaction behind this one item. So it's like giga crazy now, because Jace normally wouldn't be able to cast repeatedly. Now he basically can absorb all the damage, right? He has the extra tankiness because of Silvermere Dawn. He can't be stunned. Then he gets a cast off, heals back to full basically because he does infinite damage because this item gives 110 AD. He one-shots something, and then he just repeats. He rinse and repeats. And if you try and burst him down, it's like, well, what can I do? If you try and attack him with more units, he just generates more mana because he's taking more damage. He gets the cast off sooner. He kills the units faster. It's absurd. It's actually really strong. So maybe they'll nerf Jace. Maybe they'll nerf Silvermere Dawn in the future. Obviously, it's on 15.2, but I'm trying to explain to you, if you see this item, you should just play Jace, right? The scaling that he has with it is insane. You should just play Jace, okay? Just putting it out there. Next, we have Vi. So Vi, Hero Augment, also can work really well with Silvermere Dawn, and Darius obviously can also work well with Silvermere Dawn for similar reasons, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend these. Obviously, Lee Sin, Braum, high cap potential, even some tanks like Dr. Mundo that have AD and HP scaling, he can get repeated cast off as well with the Silvermere Dawn mana gen. Those can work out. You can also have interaction with Horizon Focus, right? Because all your attacks will stun, so now Horizon Focus has some extra synergies there. But of course, I would more angle towards Jace. That's like the main Exodia situation. Next, we have Sniper's Focus. So Sniper's Focus, you gain 2 attack range, and you gain 9% damage amp for each hex between the holder and the target. It gives some AP, some AD, and attack speed. It's pretty generic because basically just extending your range, and it's giving you increased damage for distance. So you can work with most units. AoE can work well. If you snipe the backline, it works really well. It gives a lot of damage amp, so it works well. That is basically Snipers, the trait, the item. But it can also work really well on melee units to give them extended range. Units like Kaisa that have a lot of AD, Gwen who hit whole board, Caitlyn who snipes like really far away. She she always targets the furthest unit. Kale, who has waves that travel really far distances. Smolder has infinite AD. These are units that are going to be really good holders of Sniper's Focus, and now you're just taking that AD and giving yourself a huge amount of damage amp, while also giving yourself extended range, which is just really powerful. Additionally, you can put it on units like Vi Hero, Viego, Yone. Like, these are melee units that you now just give extended range to, but also units like Zig, Seraphine, pretty much anybody. It's just a really good item. It gives a lot of damage amp no matter what, so it's just a decently generic item, but typically you want to pair it with units that have a lot of stats in general. Next we have Spectral Cutlass. So Spectral Cutlass gives AD, it gives armor, MR, and some crit. Basically what it does is you teleport to the mirrored hex on the enemy side of the board, and then after 8 seconds you return to the opposite side. So this is basically the jump scare item. It's pretty specific because obviously you have to have a unit that jumps to the back line, but it could also be forcing in some situations. You basically cheese your opponent. You basically just teleport and you can instantly just be in front of a backline carry. The teleport happens first, so obviously make sure that you have some survivability, because if you just like have a unit that's a glass cannon and they just pop in front of the enemy carry will start hitting you and you'll just die instantly. But also just know there's some positioning tricks around it. I'll talk about that in a second. But units like Vi Hero Augment, obviously, Jace and Volibear just jump scare, just instantly teleport Darius. You can even send a unit like Braum and just like attack the back line as well, which is crazy. One thing to note with positioning, by the way, so like, you know, let's say somebody has Spectral Cutlass. I'll take a Volibear for example here. Here we go. We'll do this, right? And then I'll put like my carry. Let's say I have a Yuumi and I have a Leona. I just want to point this out here. So if you have a unit like this and Volibear is here and you put a Spectral Cutlass on Volibear, he'll teleport to the opposite side. He'll jump in front of the Yuumi. He'll kill your Yuumi. You lose the game. You cry and everything's bad and miserable. What you can do to position around this is if you put a unit right here. So like, you know, not here, but right here. I think here it also works, but usually here. What happens is when the Volibear teleports, he teleports like here. He'll always target the upwards unit first. So if you could put a reliable tank here, then the Volibear will basically just spare your unit. Obviously, you can like trap your unit, like you can put some units like this so that he doesn't hit your main unit. But if you can put like a relatively tanky unit right there, then this Volibear will always target there with Spectral Cutlass. That's like a way you can get around it if you don't know already. Next we have Statikk Shiv. So 40 AP and 40 AS. Every third attack deals 40 plus 40% of the holder's bonus ability power as additional magic damage to 4 enemies. So a lot of times this is pretty specific or forcing, similar to some of the other ones. You want it on AP auto attackers. So units that scale well with attack speed, auto attack a bunch, but also scale with AP. So if you have like a Gwinsu Archangel build, it can work really well. Think your Kog'Maw and your Ziggs. These are typically Gwinsu Archangel build holders, but also a unit like Kale, it works really well because she scales really well off attack speed. However, it does also just do a lot of ability power. Based on a lot of it does a lot of damage based on if you have a lot of ability power. So even units like, you know, Zyra Twisted Fate that work with attack speed can work well, but also like a unit like Karma, if she has enough ability power, she can actually make an okay use of the item. But typically you're going for Kog'Maw, Ziggs, Kale. Those are like your main ones that you should think about in your head. Next we have Suspicious Trenchcoat. So once per combat at 60% health, you split into 3 copies of yourself. This one's usually considered generic most sets, but it's pretty forcing this set. The main thing is that it's usually good on units that you want to have multiple of, getting their abilities off. So like Braum stuns, that's like the main holder. If I had Trenchcoat, the main holder I would think of is Braum, just to get the Braum stuns. A lot of times you want to pair it with like those lifeline style items or those once per combat items. Sterix, Protector's Vow, Edge of Night, because when they split, they reproc those effects. So it's really important because then you have your 3 mini copies that have low health. But then if you give them all a Protector's Vow or a Sterix or an Edge of Night, they all have survivability and they can just like run amok and do wild, nasty things. A lot of times it's good with melee and high mobility units because you can often get to the back line. I think it's weaker this set in general though, because a lot of times if you're putting Suspicious Trenchcoat on a user, when they split, they don't get the fruit. It doesn't dupe the fruit. Like all 3 holders of Trenchcoat don't each have the fruit active. So units like, you know, if you're putting on like a Volibear, for example, it's like okay on him, but a lot of times you want to have your bonus fruit on your Volibear. So now you can't put the Trenchcoat on the Volibear and the fruit like you could, but you're getting a lot less value out of it. So a lot of times it's good on like a unit like Braum, which you might not necessarily want to fruit, but you want to have like multiple effects proccing. But in general, like, you know, Vi, Volibear, Lee Sin, Jace, like units that when they split, they can do a lot of damage, can also be good with the trench coat. But I think this set, it's something that I more so avoid because of that fruit interaction. A lot of times, if I'm itemizing and playing towards these units, I'd rather have my fruit on those units, so it makes it a little bit clumsy is what I would say. Next we have Talisman of Ascension. This item's shit, but we'll talk about it. Basically, 20 AD, 20 AP, and 300 health. After 22 seconds, you gain 100% max health and 120 damage am. It's very forcing. It's generally bad because it just takes forever to proc. Basically, you're hoping that within 22 seconds the fight isn't over, and then you're hoping that after that time you proc this and you win. It's really hard to get to work a lot of the times. The only unit I ever see it like have any sort of success on, and even this is rare, is Mundo. Because Mundo in certain cases, especially after Mundo 3, he can be hard to kill, and then you can proc the Talisman. And he also has insane HP scaling, so even when you proc it, then it's like an instant you win the round. But it's just the waiting 22 seconds. A lot of times you're better off just taking an item or something that has abilities that work within those 22 seconds, because you're more likely to win the fight within the first 22 seconds than you are to just like build your old comp to make sure that you live 22 seconds to hope that the Talisman then clutches up after. But like I said, I think Mundo, it's really good. There are some other tanks. If you have like a Giga tank that's like a reroll, it's typically going to be a little bit better. It can be Exodia. You have to really have like a situation like items, augments, everything supporting it, which is really hard to do sometimes. But if you can get everything working, then obviously you have a really silly and cool win condition. I've done it before. You guys can do it. I believe in you. You can also put on units like other tanks like Set. I've also seen it be put on Akali, because Akali just like takes forever to die in a lot of those fights. Like, you know, you play the 6 Protector Akali line that I was talking about in the patch notes. Or sorry, the patch guide a couple days ago. In those builds, it's like sure, but try it at your own risk. I don't recommend. The only one I can see it feasible is like more so like the Mundo lines with like active healing, you know. Next we have Indomitable. So Indomitable gives some armor, MR, and some HP. The move speed is drastically reduced, which means you just kind of stay in spot. And then you gain HP, stun immunity, and a couple other things. I think it got cut off. But the main thing that you want to think about is that this is a pretty generic tank item. It could be specific in some cases, but it basically just gives you a lot of tank. Oh, sorry, it gives stun immunity, and then when you don't have a target, you drag somebody close to you. That's the main thing. Like, you drag people towards you. So it's generic tank, right? You have HP resistant stun immunity, and then you pull in the target, so it can often grief positioning for other people. Here I just put like all the tanks I can think of that are pretty reliable with this item. So Cassante, Jarvan, Udyr in a lot of cases can live forever, especially if you have Vertical Juggernaut, Lee Sin, Braum, even Swain Vi. Now Swain Vi, obviously Crystal Gambit. This is a Crystal Gambit item, so it's going to be skewed Swain Vi. But even Swain in like Sorks or Vi in like Juggernaut builds as well could also be good. But I just want to put them here as well in case you have a Crystal Gambit cash out. And just to like mention it as well. But the way you should think about this is just like, I need a tank item. It's like, whatever, I'll just take this. It gives me tank stats, and it keeps my tank situation in the middle. It can also be a really good counter item towards like people who do those weird positionings, like, you know, like the Caitlyn Jace positioning, where they put the Caitlyn, the Jace on one side, and they try and draw your units off towards the center. Because if you have a unit with Indomitable, then it won't move fast enough, right? It won't move, so then these units will actually move towards the Indomitable unit, and then you'll be fine, right? It completely counters those styles of positionings, so it can also be useful there. Next we have Titanic Hydra. So it gives AD and attack speed and some HP. Attacks deal 3% of the holder's max health plus 8% of their attack damage as bonus physical damage to the target and adjacent enemies. So it kind of gives you like a little bit of an AoE effect. It's pretty specific because you need a unit that either has an insane amount of AD or insane amounts of HP, or usually a combination of both. It scales off HP and AD, so be careful with that, but either or can also give you some extra damage. It's just not that powerful, so just be careful. In general, it's a little bit risky. I wouldn't make him a first pick, but units like Volibear has double AD scaling because he's Edgelord and Luchador, so he gets like AD from 2 different sources, so you can actually have really high AD to actually use the Titanic Hydra. Units like Ashe, it actually works pretty well on because she scales her AD really high with the Kraken build, like Gwynsu Kraken, Titanic Hydra can do a lot of damage. But Garen Hero Augment, he scales HP really well and he does a lot of damage, so Titanic Hydra can work really well there. Additionally, you have like 5 costs like Lee Sin and Yone, just giving them like a little bit of like an AoE damage effect. 5 costs also have naturally a lot of base stats of HP and AD, so they can actually make a little bit of use of it as well. Next we have Tricksters Glass. So summon a clone with 70% base health and 10% max mana, and you can equip items to the clone. It gives you some crit, some attack speed, and some armor and MR. It's pretty generic, but sometimes specific. Basically, the way you should think about it is that it just gives you an extra copy of a unit. It's great if you have a reroll unit that you make a second copy of. It's also great for tempo. Early game, you just have duplicate units, which can be really powerful. But a lot of times, you're trying to use this item to 5-cost dupe. You just pick a 5-cost that has a really strong effect, or units that have strong effects, make a dupe of it. Double Braum, that's incredible. Double Zyra, that's probably good. Double Lee Sin, that's probably good. But then also, like, you know, double of other copies of units, like Poppy, double Poppy, especially if you're playing Vertical Star Guardian, could be great. Double Leona in Vertical Battle Academia. Double Kabuko, he does lots of stuns, especially if you have Kabuko 3. Double Cassante, then the Cassante clone will also revive. So now you have double Cassante, but they both revive, so it's like you have 4 Cassante. That's a lot of Cassante. Unending Despair. So this one, if you have a shield that breaks, 150 of that shield is dealt as magic damage to a nearby enemy. This one's specific. You need to have a unit that shields. Very obvious. It can be great with reroll because sometimes you can find Exodia. Obviously, Jarvan Poppy, these are units that shield. Shen, especially if you reroll Shen with crew, could be really great because he has like an insane amount of shielding, so that's a really great win con. You also have Leona and even Cassante. Cassante's a little bit off to the side because usually Cassante, it's like protectors, right? Protectors, the trait shields, so you can get a little bit of Unending Despair value there, and then you can just use it as like a mid tank item, so it can work on like pretty much all the protectors that way. But just keep in mind, I don't think it's that crazy there, but it's more so on the main shielding units that you would want. Next we have Wits End. So attacks deal bonus magic damage, which scales with the stages. And then you heal for 35% of your magic damage dealt. It gives you some armor, MR, attack speed, and HP. This one's pretty specific and forcing. Some units really like it. It's good with units that attack a lot. Obviously, if you're doing auto attacks, you get a lot of bonus magic damage. But a lot of times you're dealing with like AP style builds. Like for example, it's like pretty shit on Ashe, even though she's like a big auto attacker. Because the magic damage is not as good as giving her like another attack speed or another damage item a lot of the times. It can often pair really well with Guinsoo. You can think of it similar to Gunblade. Twisted Fate, it's one of his best items, but also this is a little bit of a skew because of the like there's the augment that gives you a 5-cost and it gives Wits End with the Twisted Fate, but in general it is a good item on him. Viego, he's like a melee user that loves to auto attack, so doing the extra magic damage is massive and he can make use of the resistances. Kog'Maw, same idea, auto attacker, so really great. Units like Akali, Kayle, even Zyra, Gwen, if they need some sort of survivability or they have a lot of auto attacks going off, you can make great use of Wits End. And a lot of times Akali, Kayle are built with Guinsoo's nowadays, Zyra as well, and Gwen, you know, it just gives some survivability and heals for magic damage, which works well with her kit. Last one. We have Zhonyas Paradox. So once per combat at 40% health, you become invulnerable and untargetable for 3 seconds. You can think of it like a better Edge of Night that gives you some AP, some armor, and MR. It's great for survivability. You can use on melee units in general. This item is very generic because you can also use it on backline units to prevent them from getting sniped. So, you know, if you have like an Akali in your pool, don't worry, you have Zhonyas. You're better with AP units, obviously, because it gives AP, but it can be even used on non-AP units. And here I have a lot of units here. Zac, I didn't put the sticker, but it's Zac Hero Augment. I'll repeat it just to make it very clear. Zac Hero Augment, it's very good with. But you can also put it on Kayle, Ziggs, Viego. Then you have your melees like Akali. You have Yuumi. You have melee like Katarina. It's insane on Gwen because the biggest problem with Gwen is that sometimes she dies before she kills everybody. But now she just won't die. Twisted Fate if you have like backline 5-cost. Seraphine, she scales off the armor and the MR, so that's great for her as well. And she can survive an extra hit. And then you have Braum, who's a melee unit. So like, you know, he's just invulnerable for 3 seconds. He can get another cast off. You know what I mean? It's insane, so it's just good on a lot of users, so just be aware of that. But anyways, that was the Ornn Artifact Guide. Sorry for taking a while of your time. I tried my best to make it as thorough as possible while giving you guys examples, explaining along the way. I'm going to put timestamps as per usual with the Ornn Artifact Guides, so keep that in mind. Have a great day. See ya. Bye-bye.